synopsis quick, even though I'm pretty sure it's...
Well, I have smashed the button.
Oh, are we going?
The button has
now.
been smashed.
The button has been smashed.
Smash the button. Well, I have to say, every time I come out here, especially when I go to my parents' place this time of year, it's just all green and beautiful. It's like, man, I can't believe I grew up here.
Where exactly is here?
Here is Detroit Lakes.
Well,
specifically,
The
you're
rectory.
in the rectory at the Holy
parish
Rosary.
here in Detroit Lake.
Where Riley's been stationed, and
It's awfully convenient that
Yes.
everyone was home this weekend.
We
Which normally is an impediment to us recording.
Yeah.
But
This
since
time-
I happen to be assigned for the summer to the place that these people
are from.
are from.
Yeah.
And because of
It
some
works out.
microphone shenanigans last time we attempted recording, so we brought our whole kit here.
Mm-hmm. Which was a lot easier than I was anticipating.
So
Yeah.
maybe we could do this more often over the
Theoretically.
summer. Who knows? Maybe not every week, but like every once in a while.
Mm-hmm. Although, like, how many episodes are we going to theoretically
I mean,
turn out this summer?
If there's 4 weeks in a month-ish,
Well, that's a fair few
that's
episodes.
about-
There's plenty of opportunities
that's
there.
near a dozen from here to the end of August.
Yep.
I will not be around for all of those.
That's
Sure,
true.
sure.
I will be out next week. For,
Oh, dear.
For a youth camp.
Well, I will be out next week
For a wedding.
I'll be in Chicago, and my sister's getting married, so will it just be you talking to yourself next week, James? Or will
Well,
you
I mean,
convince-
because you're only going to be gone.
We can record in the middle of the week.
Yeah.
That's the thing we can do.
okay,
Yeah, so we can grab John for a guest appearance or something and talk about something.
neat.
That's usual, especially now that he lives in the same house. It's like,
Right.
come
Very
downstairs.
convenient to grab your.
Yeah, come downstairs. I need you for a sub.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in the same room as us right now, which is, I think we're pretty much done moving. There's like a couple more things we need to put together, but the process is complete.
There might be like some kitchenwares that nobody else wants. That we're like, yeah, sure, we'll claim, but we have to wait for our remaining roommates in our other house.
Well,
to...
it's just Colton. Although Mike hasn't
really?
grabbed all of his stuff yet, but
Right,
he's
which
got a
is-
new place.
Like, so that's why I'm saying the other roommates to
Yeah.
get their stuff out of the house. That's why I use the plural form.
Because there's a few things we genuinely have no idea who it belongs to.
Right, and so it'll just be either it belongs to one of us or none of us because we got it from the Yellow Men's house next to Newman when we tore that down.
The house that was yellow.
The house that was yellow, that's the only way to refer to it because that's the only way anyone ever referred to it, aside from giving an address, which I don't think anybody here is particularly comfortable with, even though it doesn't exist anymore.
I mean,
Doesn't-
I don't remember the address of the old place.
1122.
That's what it was? Oh, okay.
Okay. It's a location that no longer exists, though, because
Yeah.
the company...
There is now a construction site on the lot and all adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not as if that space in the universe was annihilated. It's just
Just get dark matter.
There is now a void where my former house used to be.
where the favorite priest took a payloader and sort of messed up, knocking down the house a little bit. Or no, it was an excavator, I think. Wasn't that like right around Thanksgiving or something they tore it down? The
don't
old
know.
place?
They were talking about keeping it as like
Yeah.
office space for
Which there was
and
no
then-
way.
And then they looked at it and said, "Yeah, why did we ever think that was going to work?"
Yeah. It's like from the outside, it's technically got the square footage, but it would be practically a nightmare. So, and just like as big as the office space was that they got for the temporary Newman Center, like
And we barely fit in that.
barely fit in that. Yeah. So I think it was a smart move.
I should know I'm the guy that takes the garbage out.
Yeah.
Although I think there's going to have to be some campus minister volunteers next week. I talked to people about that because I won't be there next week.
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
be out of town again, like I said before.
Put one of those summer peer ministers on it.
Probably. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just bathrooms and garbage twice a week, and it's 1 week that I'm gone. So
You
no
put
big
their
deal.
food and water bowl for them in the morning. I have to say, of all the of all the people to clean up their offices, partially because Monsignor Schlesselman is off doing all sorts of things with diaconate formation and stuff, but I maybe had to take his trash out like once a month.
He produces very little trash. Like
He just keeps
on
his office
average, the least.
very orderly.
I mean, there've been a couple of people who have rotated in and out of position, so it's like maybe they would have produced less over a longer period of time, but they weren't there long enough to really compare.
Insufficient sample size, yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was a job.
But funny thing about being the janitor at the Newman Center is it's hot out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the staff will, while I'm not there, get some kind of like ice pops or something like that for the group. So I will be doing the rounds, taking people's garbage out. I'm like,
there's popsicle
there's
sticks
very
here.
specific types of wrappers and sticks in here. I'm gonna go check the freezer to make sure.
Well, because that was the thing over the summer. Like people would get that sort of stuff and it would just sit there for months, and so by the time school started, it wasn't really that nice to look at anymore.
So no, there's side
So
benefits.
you're doing.
I'm cleaning up the fridge.
You're cleaning up the fridge. Yeah.
I'm cleaning up the freezer.
You know, it's just a freezer burnt Sandy's donut. You know, nobody's gonna want to eat that, but you're not.
It's been out
choosing-
You're
since-
not above that when
Yeah.
you're a college student.
No, you're not above that when you're Nathan in general.
Yeah. So those some of the little secrets of the janitor life, I guess, specific to the Newman Center. I have no idea how normal janitors are.
I mean,
If you're working at Home Depot as a
I feel
janitor,
like it's a pretty applicable thing for just about any janitor.
I suppose
You
It just depends on the
know the
space.
ins and outs of the building.
I could pick the school janitor's brain at work and see like what he does.
what kind of shared experience you may or may not have.
Yeah, but normally by the time I get in the office, they're already done.
Like a ninja,
Yeah,
silent and no one notices.
Yeah, well, he's got a very distinctive laugh, so I can hear him down the hall. But
Okay.
yeah, my garbage is gone by the time I get to work. So, usually it is. But yeah, janitor life. Oh yeah, busy. We didn't record last week. I suppose we should address that because of the move.
We ought to. Yeah, there was just kind of stuff up in the air and all over the place.
Yeah.
Everybody was moving all at the same time, all three of us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
Yeah.
What did
We're
what
allowed to take breaks and stuff.
what did you think of the dual cast with just
I
Nathan
haven't
and I?
listened to it yet.
Okay.
So
It was all right.
I'm almost finished with the Halo episode.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sure. Because there was a couple you were out on because of stuff with seminary. and
Moving
stuff.
from
Denver.
Indiana,
This isn't your
Seminary.
first one back since you've gotten back from the seminary in Denver.
from Denver.
From Denver, yeah.
Yes.
There was one we did.
Yeah,
trans-
we
yeah.
did one or two.
Okay.
While I was there
Yep.
early.
And then yeah, so we're back at it. Hopefully a little more consistently, although there'll be some rotating cast. I'll be
Right. Tell you what, I think you're going to be the most consistent person on the podcast.
Well, I'm the producer. If I'm not
you are.
here,
If you're
it's
not here, who's going to press play on the computer?
It's not as if nobody else is capable. It's just like that's my thing. I'm the producer guy. Hey, you know?
Right, but thus far, Riley's rotated in and out in a lot. I've already missed one, being the Avatar
episode, yeah.
And now I'm going to miss at least one more.
Yeah. I'll be well, here's the thing, like for the episode where I'll be in Montana, I feel like we'll probably be able to record beforehand. So
Sure. Just with some
because I don't leave until Tuesday.
behind-the-scenes clever scheduling.
Yeah. So stay tuned. I guess while we talk about the podcast, we haven't told Nathan about this.
Meta-podcast.
Podcast.
Yeah, we haven't told Nathan about this idea
Oh, I
yet.
showed up a little late.
Well,
We
no,
were
like
talking about this last
like-
week. Something.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Something.
yeah. So, well, we
You're
have
just going to
some
run this by me right now,
Yeah.
live on tape.
live
This is my-
reaction cam, but it's a microphone. Nathan's audible visual reaction. Something. It's a big, but it's not really that big. Well, we are considering expanding the scope of the podcast a little bit, all while remaining true to our brand.
Remaining true to the essential function of the podcast.
Yeah, which is to educate the people,
But like
to be
bringing
Palladian.
up new kinds of topics
Yes.
to talk about.
Yes.
That is what
Why
it's
don't you pitch it, Riley? Since it was
So
you were the originator.
My idea is, I've been around on the Catholic internet a long time, and as I've started studying philosophy in my courses at seminary, I've looked around for supplemental philosophy content out there, and there just isn't.
Uh-huh.
And there's lots of Thomism stuff, which is great.
And apologetics stuff.
Apologetics is not philosophy.
No, but like applying...
I like to complain about apologists, but we'll save that for another day.
Okay, sounds good.
There's just not a lot out there besides Thomistic philosophy, and there's a lot more to the tradition than Thomistic philosophy.
Which, don't get us wrong, Thomas is good, but
we love Thomas here.
He's part of the bigger picture.
And I imagine there's other schools of philosophical thought that, although flawed, there's things you can take from them,
even
right?
solely within a Christian context, and things that we consider to be more or less error-free have a very different approach than Thomas does.
Oh, sure.
Thomas is heavily founded on Aristotle, and a lot of the early church fathers had their foundations on Plato and Plotinus. So it has been a thought that's been percolating in my brain that I would like to start introducing some of these core philosophy topics so that people who are evaluating media, like us, can understand them better.
Have the vocabulary and be equipped to understand these things.
Well, this would end up being an effort spearheaded primarily by you and guided by you, because you're the one taking philosophy, and I've never taken a philosophy class. I am sorely behind on this.
Right, and I have...
That's kind of part of the fun of it, is that you guys are my instant feedback about whether
we're the everyman characters
makes any sense at all.
We're the everyman characters for the audience.
We're the stand-in for the audience. We're avatars.
But like a lot more practically, because I've studied a bit on my own, like some introductory stuff, but it would be good to...
And I've been in the room when your brother-in-law has talked philosophy. He took philosophy in college. And so
my sister's husband has also participated in those sorts of discussions.
Here's the thing. Your brother-in-law means your sister's husband. So I think that's...
Well, that's the bit.
That is the bit. That is the definition, but there is also another way to say
it. Andrew.
You're not supposed to do anything but use his real name.
No, our shared brother... he did philosophy in college, so I've been in the room for some philosophical discussions, and there's some interesting stuff there. So yeah, I would be pretty down for it. We would need to create a new bumper for it. We would need to create a kind of a format for it. Right? But
try to keep it within the wheelhouse of Palladium Papist. So we'll figure out
But also now that it's on the podcast, as long as this is not getting edited out, we can get some feedback in case our listeners, all two of them, disapprove of this direction.
Well,
we might just do it regardless of whether they approve or not.
Yeah.
We're just going to do it.
I've mulled over the idea of making it a separate podcast, so that people don't have to go filter through the main Palladian Papist feed to find it. I can just have it as this separate entity that's like
same branding and whatnot. It's still branding,
but still a distinct feed, so that it's all a one-stop shop. You don't have to go filtering.
Which means
if that's something you're particularly interested in.
But that would also make our main Palladian Papists uploads a little more inconsistent, because one week we might do one week
doing that, and so there'll be a week gap here and there.
But
it's something we'll have to think about exactly how we're going to present it. But I would
stay tuned.
Palladian Papist presents.
it's
Palladian philosophy.
Yeah, as we develop this brand. No, as we continue to develop the podcast, and but stay tuned. It's not going to be like a seismic change. We're not doing like a Crunch rebrand or anything like that. So
that wasn't really a seismic change.
No.
They just kind of had structure added that they didn't have before,
which
we have been doing since day one.
Yeah, it's kind of like the house I grew up in. Like, it wasn't done, and we gradually finished it over the course of like 15 years. So that's kind of the podcast thing we got going on here.
It's evolving.
Another thing too is the more we put effort into this, we're doing this now completely for free because I got rid of Adobe programs because it was going to be too expensive. But
aside from like a couple of microphones here and there,
we do this because we like doing it. But we would appreciate it if y'all would encourage others to listen to the podcast as well. And who knows, maybe with the Philosophy Cast or whatever name we come up with for that, will end up being more popular than the original, and that's okay. There's different strokes for different folks, as they say. But yeah, just spread the good word about the podcast. I'll try to get more consistent about posting.
social media.
On social media, yeah. We'll be continuing to develop the pod as we go along.
Speaking of social media, where can they find it? No,
Yeah,
they're not there yet.
We're not there yet at
All
all.
right, folks, podcast's over. Pack it up.
Yeah. We're just shooting the breeze. That's the cast today. But I guess if on that note, yeah, we can. We're the Palladium Papists. I'm James.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Riley.
And this has been the cleanest segue we've ever had into an episode of Philosophical, as I understand.
Yep, we are doing Philosophical today.
In a world where one man will decide whether to pull a lever and kill one man, or not pull a lever and allow 5 people to die, find out in Philosophical.
So yeah, Philosophical is where we get philosophical about films, but not in the same ways that whatever. We'll get there. So today we are talking about Saving Private Ryan, which was made in 1998. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, set in the invasion of Normandy in World War II. So recently, last week in fact, was I believe the 77th anniversary of the D-Day landings, which you might know from your history class or whatever. So 1944, the Allies are invading the French coast of Normandy to retake Europe, and about a year later, they managed to defeat the Nazis. That's this oversimplistic view of it. So that's the backdrop, the setting of the film. Now this is a fictional. It's a fictional story, but it's based loosely on real accounts, which weren't as dramatic. But the purpose of the movie, I believe, is more to kind of give the most, because up until this point, most war films, you had your John Wayne or your different actors.
It was war heroes, a little over glorified,
silver screen type of stuff. And then in the later half of the 20th century, you have your Vietnam films and all that stuff. So
which are all anti-war, very.
Yeah, but the depiction of war it was a very Hollywoodized bent to it. And one thing this film is particularly renowned for is just showing the raw and realism, grim, brutal reality of combat.
Which kind of has become the norm for modern.
It really set the tone for following war movies. Films. Yeah, that came after it. So it was really groundbreaking in a lot of ways, and quite literally spawned the whole. It inspired every World War II shooter afterwards, because I believe sidetrack, but the Medal of Honor games was made by I think Steven Spielberg was a consultant or something, and then that whole branched off. So this is sort of the historical backdrop of
Basically, this movie has made an impact on pop culture and film history. Mm-hmm. It's an important one.
Yeah. So we open the movie. There's this elderly man and his family are visiting a grave site at the Normandy beach for all the soldiers who gave their lives during the invasion. And they come across this one headstone, and the man falls to his knees with emotion, and then it transitions back to, at that point, I want to say 50 years earlier, during the Normandy landings. So the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, where they, get out of the boats and storm the beach under machine gun fire and just death everywhere, is widely considered to be the most accurate depiction of the Normandy landings ever put to film. Some of the facts about the filming are just insane. I think it was some astronomical number of gallons of fake blood or something they used to film the movie. But anyway, that's all stuff aside. We can talk about
in the days
later.
Before they could just paint it in afterwards.
Yeah. So the at Omaha, they're landing at Omaha Beach, and so you have Tom Hanks leading his squad, and they invade their 2nd Ranger Battalion, I believe, Captain John Miller. They work their way up the beachhead and defeat the Germans, and eventually start pushing into Normandy. So back at the War Department, the top brass learn that there is this family of soldiers, 3 of whom had been killed. I believe it was 2 or 3 of whom had been killed in other theaters. One was in North Africa, one was in the Pacific or something. And then there was one remaining brother in this family who was in the military, who was in the 101st Airborne and had dropped behind enemy lines. And so because earlier in World War II, there was the Sullivan brothers, I believe, There's these 5 brothers that all joined the Navy together, and they all went down with this one ship that got sank. And so after that, the U.S. military made this policy where if there was one surviving family member, that person would automatically get sent home so that their families wouldn't be completely bereaved. There would be a survivor of the family. And so they find out that there's this guy who didn't know his brothers were dead, sent behind enemy lines. And so like, well, we got to send some people to go get him. So Captain Miller's ordered to take a squad from the Normandy landings and work his way, even though so in Normandy, for background, you have the invasion on the beaches, but then they had paratroopers drop behind enemy lines to hold key points so they could disrupt the German response to the invasion. But the main force hadn't quite caught up to them yet, so they were still kind of stranded behind enemy lines. So the small squad of people has to make its way to this town where they believe Private James Ryan, which is funny because I have a brother named Ryan. Anyway, they have to go get him and bring him home. So they make their way across the French countryside, coming across different, battalions of soldiers on their way through, get into a few scrapes with the Germans. A number of the troops get killed on their way through there. There's sort of some resentment growing among the squad because they're like, well, why? Because they've lost a couple of their comrades at this point. They're like, well, why are 8 of our lives deemed equal to this one dude's life in this whole mess of stuff? And so they're sort of struggling with the decency and the being, because these guys are veterans of different conflicts, right? They've been in North Africa and stuff. So this isn't their first rodeo, and they've been through a lot, but they're like, this kid's a greenhorn. Like, why are we going to save him? And so they're trying to find decency, and that's sort of the conflict going on there. There's one scene in particular that's pretty powerful. So they come across these bodies, and there's this German radar station, and they get fired at by a machine gun. And so they realize, oh, even though this isn't our mission, we should take out this machine gun nest so that more of our guys don't keep getting killed by these people. And so they assault the position and take the guys out. But one of their troops is mortally wounded. And so that sparks out the whole debate about why are we doing this? And so there's on the point of mutiny, because they had captured this one German soldier, and they're like, well, do we let him go or do we execute him because we can't take him as a prisoner? Because if we just let him go, he'll probably just go right back to the Germans and keep fighting and killing Americans. So they have this whole debate, and then Captain Miller sort of uses his there's a standoff between a couple of the soldiers, and he diffuses it because he's never revealed to these guys his personal life. He'd been a school teacher and sort of had a gentle upbringing and stuff like that. So he kind of shows his human side and diffuses the situation. They let the guy go, hoping that, he has the decency to, not keep fighting. And they're like, all right, well, you got to go to American lines. We'll disarm you. Got to go to American lines and turn yourself in as a POW. So they make their way to this town. They don't quite know where Captain or Private Ryan is, so they're asking these different units that they come across where he's at. But they manage to come. They get a tip that brings them to this town where they encounter him, and then he's like, "Yep, I'm Private Ryan." It's played by Matt Damon, and they're like, Matt Damon. So yeah, they come across him there. And they're like, all right, well, we're here to bring you home. And he's like, what? No, I can't leave my brothers. I lost my biological brothers in the war, but these guys I've been with, training forever. And it turns out that the remnants of their unit is all that's keeping this key town from being captured by this German panzer unit that's going to come through and take the town. They're like, well, what do we do here? Do we just fulfill our mission and leave these guys to their fate? Or do we stay and fight and try to, bring some decency and hopefully save Private Ryan along the way? So they ultimately decide to stay behind and help try to keep the town. So eventually the Germans come, and through some brutal fighting, most of the squad gets killed, including Captain Miller. but they managed to hold it down long enough for the rest of the Allies to show up and, beat back the assault. And so as he's laying dying, Captain Miller takes Private Ryan by the arm and he's like, earn this, earn it. And so, and then it flashes back forward years later where the old gentleman is Private Ryan and he's visiting the gravestone of Captain Miller. And he's like, I've lived my whole life since then hoping to try and earn it like you told me to. And so that's kind of where the movie ends. That's the not so brief overview.
It's briefer than most of your overviews. Let's be real here.
Yeah. There's some subplots which we'll get into on the different transcendental analyses, but the story is loosely based on it wasn't Private Ryan. I forgot what his name was, but I believe he was one of the troops he was in the same unit as the guys from the Band of Brothers 101st Airborne Unit. He had his brothers die in the war, and then he got sent home. But it turned out that one of his brothers, who had died in the Pacific, was like a pilot, I believe, but he was a POW. And so when the war ended, he came home, and so instead of losing 3 of the brothers, there was still 2 alive. So that was kind of a little happy ending there. That's the true story. It wasn't as dramatic. They basically just called up his unit, was like, "Hey, send him back." So
right.
that's the loose.
So
but
they dramatized they took the idea of that kind of a story, and dramatized it to make commentary on wartime thinking and what the mindset of a soldier was in World War II.
Yep.
Because there is a lot of discussion in this movie about the value of a human person.
Yep.
About what it's worth, what is worth going through. Is it easier to let someone die or to kill someone if it's inconvenient for you? Or, there's a lot of really interesting discussions they touch on. Yeah.
And there's a pretty good cast of characters in here too. The stars off the top of my head, obviously you have Tom Hanks and Matt Damon, and then you got Vin Diesel as well as one of the troops that gets killed.
Oh yeah, he was.
The characters are pretty good. It's generally with war films they try to have like these soldiers that are sort of a cross section of American life, right? Back in the day, like your average Joe trooper,
a group of archetypes, in a sense.
Yep. You have I don't remember the name of the actor, but you have the sergeant who's sort of the second in command, and he's kind of Captain Miller's loyal, second in command, and tries to keep the other troops in line. And then you have all these other guys who are, not quite sold on this, but then in the end ultimately choose to make the right decision and try to. The whole thing is they're having this debate among themselves, like, we've done a lot of crazy stuff and war is dirty. Like, how do we bring any decency to this? And it's like, well, if we can send this kid home to his mother and prevent her from losing one more son, then we brought some decency into this world. So into this messed up world. So some of the characters, there's the sniper, who's he's a killing machine, but then every time he kills an enemy, he says a prayer. He's like praying the Psalms, between like, have mercy on me, O Lord, or something like that. But then he's praying for himself and also the people he kills, which is kind of an interesting concept. There's another character who he's a side character who has sort of an impact. So he's kind of this logistics guy. He's kind of a scrawny little dude, and not really. He's technically an infantryman, but he's mostly like an aide or whatever to this officer. But he gets picked to get sent along with these guys, and so he struggles a lot with whether or not he'd be brave. He's never fired a shot in anger. So he struggles a lot with whether or not he'd be brave enough to kill or whether or not he could kill. And there's this moment where he sort of freezes in fear and conflict with himself as one of his comrades is in a hand-to-hand fight with this German soldier being killed. And so he's there with a gun. He could have helped him, but he's just kind of frozen and can't do it. But later, they discover that prisoner who they had told who they had told to go turn himself in as a POW, he's back with this unit taking this town, fighting and so this guy, this scrawny guy, sort of has a change of heart and kills the guy for betraying them, basically, and turning on them. So that's sort of his character arc. But let's see, because you've seen it. I think you and I saw it. at the same time way back when.
I don't know if I saw it with you. I know I've seen it a while ago.
Yeah, have you seen it, Riley?
Yeah, it's been a while, but I have seen it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we can talk about. I mean, it's a war film. Obviously, it's not really an entertainment value thing. But what are some positives from the movie? Like just broadly, like because I mean, as war, it's sort of the quintessential war movie that most people will think of when you think of like a World War II war film. The movie doesn't sugarcoat the violence at all. Like, in fact, it does the exact opposite. And I think that woke up a lot of people, who watched like war movies and things up to that point. It's like, oh, war isn't some fun game. Like, people die and get mutilated and die in horrible, grotesque ways, and it's ugly. Even though World War II had some clear moral implications to it, like
probably some of the clearest moral implications in
any war, just about ever.
It's on a macro scale at least, but the soldiers on both sides did terrible things to one another, in service of their countries. So it really portrays that the human cost of war. But then they still decide, even in all this horrible stuff going on, that they can still try to
there's good that can come from it and worth to make things worth fighting for.
And sort of in Captain Miller, as he's dying and telling Private Ryan to, earn this, it's sort of a message to Private Ryan and the audience. It's like these people...
Make our sacrifice worth it.
Yeah, we went through hell so that a new world could come out of it. So try to earn it.
So it's not only a message for Private Ryan literally in the movie, but for everyone who survived and everyone who benefits.
Yep.
Don't let us waste this.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I like, just because I like details, is there's a bunch of different references and small details that were historically accurate. I find really fascinating. Like at one point, these two troops come out of a bunker and are like asking to be, or trying to surrender, and they're yelling at something, and the troops don't understand them, so they shoot them. But somebody went through and realized, oh, these guys are speaking Czech. They're not Germans. And what they were saying in Czech is, we're not German, don't shoot. Because during World War II, especially as the fighting on the Eastern Front with the Russians got more and more brutal, the Germans were short on troops, so they would take POWs, give them German equipment, and tell them to go fight on the front lines. So they actually, one of the crazier stories that came out of this. So Russia had fought, because Japan had taken the Korean peninsula, so there's these Korean soldiers who were POWs forced to fight for the Russians, who were then POWs of the Germans forced to fight the Americans. So they had Korean troops at Normandy and like Czechs and all these different things. It's kind of bizarre stuff that happens like that. So yeah, things like that. That's what I enjoy about movies. It's like different things, but obviously very well filmed and executed. We'll get into the beauty and stuff, but yeah. Any other comments, I suppose, from the peanut gallery?
Not off the top of my head, as I said, I haven't seen it in a long time. And aside from like the vague plot and the overall morals of it, it didn't stick with me the way it probably stuck with you, being the World War II guy. I'm kind of a World War II junkie, yeah. From story time, from a very young age, like. So there's 5 of us boys in my family. The 2 older ones were really into World War II. So from the age of 4, I could name just about every airplane that was used. Like, no joke. We had a book with pictures and everything, and I had memorized like all the names of the aircraft and stuff. So, this stuff is, when you're a kid, like this sort of thing is like cool. Like, oh wow, look at all these cool planes and stuff. And then as I've gotten older, my interest has sort of matured into like, when I watch a war movie, it's more of a solemn, reflective kind of a activity than just a raw action. Be, I think.
Yeah, because a lot of people, there's been long-standing debates about the merits of violence in film, and some films, there's just gratuitous violence. Like nobody's pretending that John Wick is like,
anything like. Some weird meta commentary or anything.
John Wick itself doesn't have anything to say about violence itself.
John Wick is violence. That is the movie.
Yeah. Really.
Whereas modern war movies, use the imagery and violence to say something about the use of violence.
Mm-hmm. And about like humanity and humanity's capacity for evil.
I mean, really, in like the really, really long haul, John Wick has something to say about using violence for violence, but that's like a several movies long.
Live by the sword, die by the sword kind of a message.
Sort of thing, yeah, but it takes it a long time to establish that fact.
Right.
Whereas this is a little more upfront and clear.
It's the point from the start.
Yeah. With war films, generally that's the message, is like it's more of an exploration of humanity, because especially now, I mean, granted, like when we were growing up, there was like the Iraq War and Afghanistan and all that going on, but it wasn't nearly as present, and because in the culture per se, I mean, now, since there are veterans coming back and telling their stories, and there's different movies being made about the Iraq War, but and the war on terror and stuff, it wasn't nearly at the scale of the Second World War.
No.
Like almost everyone knew somebody or had a family member who was in the service. Like both of my grandfathers were in the Army and Navy, aunts and uncles. Like everybody at least knew someone who had died in the war, more than likely. And it was like a big cultural impact. And so in peacetime, it's a little harder to appreciate that. Well, because like, especially now in the 20th and 21st centuries, like, not in the 21st century, war hasn't been nearly as ubiquitous as the 20th century, but I think we tend to forget how, for millennia, war was sort of the reality every day, like the reality that humans have lived in. So like, even though it's not been a completely peaceful past few decades, like
it's been more
compared
peaceful
to
than previous centuries.
Yeah. In the backdrop of human history, there's been a lot of wars, a lot of death, basically any movement ended up with a war at some point.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting too, and this is kind of a wide tangent, but one of the things I think about too is that a lot of people, will talk about, religious wars and things like that. But then when you look at, the 20th century, which had World War I and World War II, were kicked off by atheistic governments and movements. So the idea of Christendom, you have the Catholic Church is sort of keeping everybody together and trying to mitigate death and violence as much as possible. And then once that's taken away, within like 2 centuries, you see like the highest death tolls of any conflicts in history. So food for thought, I guess. But that's a wide tangent. Before I runneth my mouth over too much, I suppose we should get into transcendental analysis. This is sort of my bread and butter. While I was still allowed to listen to podcasts at work, I would listen to this podcast talking about wars and war crimes and different crazy stuff, and I would just crank out work like crazy. Like,
you know what?
Deep thought.
I'm beginning to believe you could hold down a whole podcast episode if we did.
I have the knowledge base. I'd have to brush up on a few details, but I could do that if I wanted to. But
nah.
And we probably touched on some of these already, but truth. What truths can we draw from Saving Private Ryan, particularly as Catholics? I suppose we could talk about just war doctrine a little bit.
Indeed, we could.
That's
who wants to take that one?
I'll let you. I've been talking for a while.
I guess I could talk about it. So the church defines a just war as one in which you are either a defending party or trying to defend another party who is being aggressed upon. Mm-hmm. And a war of aggression is not morally permissible under the church's guidelines. If we just
we're invading Mexico.
We're invading Mexico today. That's not
just because we want to.
That's right. Just just offhand.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a morally justifiable war, because the ending of human life by not God is something we would like to avoid
at
by all means,
every cost possible.
At every cost possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from Mexico's perspective, it would be a just war because they are defending themselves and their country and its residents from an aggressor. And if Canada decided to come to Mexico's aid in that, they would also be morally justified in so doing.
And from the Allied perspective, World War II is a pretty classic case of just war. That's now just because a country may engage in a just war doesn't mean that everything they do in war is just. Stuff
But just
happens
from
and people
the
die.
outset, it is a permissible action.
So it sort of walks the line between pacifism and, being a warmonger. Like, only under the right conditions can one wage war morally.
Yeah, don't just take a beating while you're down, but also don't be the one beating people down.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. When I think there's a lot of people who rightly, will advocate for peace, and people who protest. Well, I think there's multiple reasons why one might protest against the military, but I think that's sort of, in my opinion, laying the problem at the wrong feet. Is not because necessarily certain nations have militaries that conflicts happen. It's sort of a both and kind of a deal. You have militaries because other people kill people, and sometimes you need to kill people so that they don't kill people. So yeah, it's not as if everyone got rid of their militaries, there would be no war and no death, because
there would be inevitably people that did not get rid of their militaries.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a evil that we won't really do away with completely until the second coming. That's sort of the reality we live in. But that does mean that we must always do our best to work for peace.
Possible to do.
It is theoretically possible.
In the human condition, sinful as we are, it's not super realistic to expect it.
Yeah.
I mean, even just in Europe, things have come a long way since World War
Yeah,
II.
Europe has fought.
I mean, they were the recipient of the worst conflict in human history, and that kind of shook them up to realize
We need to stop this.
we should maybe work this thing out
Yeah.
a little more peacefully, maybe.
You don't have Germany and France like duking it out with each other anymore, which is, that
Something
took
With everyone crowded around going, fight.
that
fight,
only took
fight,
like 1,000
fight.
years to happen. That type of thing. So yeah, so wars may be engaged in justly, and there's other films like we may end up talking about Hacksaw Ridge at some point.
After you see that one, that's
I
good.
need to watch that. But the conscientious objectors and things like that. So, but yeah, there's such thing as a just war, but that doesn't mean all war is just or all things that happen in war are just. But you got to apply the principle of double effect in all things. Is the good achieved? Does that outweigh the evil that is committed? Because no matter what, it is an act of evil to take a human life, even if that person, is.
Even if you intend good from it.
Mm-hmm. So you have to live with that. And, in World War II, it's good to, another broad truth, I suppose, is to keep in mind, like a lot of people nowadays will refer to World War II and like you're a Nazi, like things like that. But like, it is important to understand, like we're less than a century removed from all these things. We're still living in the shadow and the aftermath of the Second World War and then the Cold War that came from that. So it's good to look back on history to understand how we got here.
Right. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it, as the saying goes.
And I'm sorry if you had a history class that you were bored with, or something like that. But it's good to find ways. There are plenty of like YouTube channels and things and books you can read and stuff that present history in a far more interesting way than it ever really is academically.
Unless you're just into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
like I
First
was,
place.
and
Yeah.
Just enjoyed doing AP US history because
Mm-hmm.
I did.
But yeah, the more you know about, the more you study human history, the more you become familiar with human nature. But then you need philosophy and other things to completely understand it and God to redeem it. So, goodness.
There we go. Big discussion out of the
Not
way.
really
Well, there's
on Saving Private Ryan, but Saving Private Ryan is sort of a reflection on
right.
World War II and a
In
sort of a
general, yeah.
microcosm of it, of a piece of it. Goodness. So, despite the war and death and terror, what were some good things in Saving Private Ryan?
The troops displayed, a degree of valor in putting their own lives on the line to try to rescue someone else.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't entirely settled on, as a whole coherent unit, on doing it.
They all
They decided
recognized
to do it in the end.
Yeah.
And so they were willing to recognized the value of family,
Mm-hmm.
and they were the particular purpose for which they were doing this is to ensure that a family member survives and can return home and take care of his family in turn. So they recognize that as a really, really important good, and it
ended up making the sacrifice for that.
Yeah, because I think there's only like one guy left out of the squad that, besides Private Ryan, that survives, and he's like one of the people who's the most reluctant. But then he's able to set aside his misgivings and fight, for his brothers until they're all gone. So
then there was also Ryan's decision at the end to not just abandon his post and his people, and the squad's decision to also not abandon them, which led to their demise, but ultimately led to a critical victory that saved the town, saved Private Ryan, and helped save the war.
Because Private Ryan, like at first they're like, well, who is this dude really? Is he worth fighting for? And then they find the kid, and it turns out he's actually a good soldier, and really. Well, like, even though he knows, like, he can go home, like, he doesn't want to. He wants to keep fighting. But then, like, by the end of it, he understands, like, okay, the sacrifice was so great, I need to honor it by, going home.
And ultimately,
and living
is
a good life.
Private Ryan? It's every surviving veteran, essentially.
Yeah. Everybody's got, like, one thing you hear a lot from soldiers is, like, that sort of survivor's guilt. Even among, there was this one guy, I was listening to a podcast where he was from like the Iraq War. He'd won the Medal of Honor, but then he's like, I got awarded for the worst day of my life, for stuff I did. So that sort of survivor's guilt, of like, why did I survive when these guys who are just as good or better than me didn't, but that's
the wrong mindset to have about it. It's not focusing on why me, it's focusing on because it's me, I need to do something with this.
And so, I guess another thing I can talk about too is like, you never want to, like, general rule of thumb, don't idolize things. Especially, you can honor the sacrifice of soldiers and stuff while understanding they're human beings who, have flaws and stuff. So they don't need to be put up on a pedestal. And honestly, most people I talk to who have been in the military don't like being put on a pedestal and that type of thing. But it's still good to respect those who have served in a healthy and ordered way. So that's my comment there. Any other good elements? I think we mostly got that. Because even in the midst of like the war and stuff, like they had a desire to, because they'd done things that made it hard to sleep at night, but they were trying to still bring some good out of the chaos and evil. So beauty. Now, war is not beautiful.
No.
But this movie was artfully made. And sometimes art reflects on evil and terror and things like that.
Right.
In ways, it's very good. It's a very evocative film.
Right. It's like, you wouldn't call The Passion of the Christ a beautiful film necessarily just because it's so brutal all the time.
Right.
But there's a point to the brutality.
Yeah.
And so same with Saving Private Ryan. It is intentionally done, and it is well done in a way that does evoke the disgust necessary towards the actions taken in the war. While
sort of a solemnity for the
doesn't
lives lost and things like that.
Sugarcoat it. It also doesn't like over glorify the violence or go overboard with the gore. Although in some cases it's hard to go overboard with how awful it actually was.
Yeah.
But like, it wasn't violence for violence sake, and it was tastefully done. It was artfully done. It was accurately done. Yeah.
So yeah. Unity. What draws everything together in Saving Private Ryan? I suppose the idea of sacrifice.
Sacrifice and the value of human life.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yep.
Because people are worth fighting for.
And, war is hell, but then, the other thing that I like to think about with like war films and different things like that. It's like, because like, you know, you like to, well, obviously like pray for the souls of those who have been lost, you know, in war and different things, and not, you know, just in general, pray for those who have died. But I like to think that, you know, in remembering the sacrifices of those who suffered horribly, you know, in wars and things like that, you were sort of keeping their memory alive and honoring them that way, even though in life, you know, they may have died a horrible death, but just like making sure those people aren't forgotten.
Mm-hmm. And it's through their horrible death that people are saved.
And we have a better world because of it, argued, you know. Like, especially in this modern world that we have here.
Right.
So I guess those are my takeaways. So with that, one of James's deep dives.
One of James's deep dives. Unfortunately, we don't have the exit script on this machine, so we're just gonna have to wing it.
Rely on my memory here. So, thanks for listening to the Palladium Papists. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Papists. You can find us on Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube.
Not on SoundCloud anymore.
No, not SoundCloud. that was episode 4. Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcasts. Or Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. If you can email us with your questions, comments, concerns, or complaints or requests for future episodes at palladiumpapists@gmail.com. And we will catch you guys again next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
See, it wasn't too bad for...
No,
I mean, it wasn't great, but...
Just stop.